Oh, I don't think 50 days is very long, and it could be sooner than that. I don't think 50 days is very long.
Mr. President, are you on Ukraine's side now?
No, I'm on nobody's side. I'm on no.
Why?
I want to. You know what the side I'm on? Humanity's side. I want to stop the killing of thousands of people a week. I want to stop the killing. I want the killing to stop in the Ukraine-Russia war. That's the side I'm on. Well, we're going to see what happens with President Putin. So far, I've been very disappointed with President Putin. I've solved a lot of wars in the last 3 months, but I haven't gotten this one yet. This is a Biden war. It's not a Trump war. I'm here to try and get us out of that mess.
That was President Trump just moments ago, getting ready to get on a helicopter in Washington, D.C., talking about how this is Biden's war. I'm not on anybody's side, and 50 days isn't very long. Welcome back, Colonel Douglas Macgregor, defense and foreign policy analyst, former advisor to Secretary of Defense, highly decorated combat veteran, and friend of the show. Welcome back as always, Doug. Can't hear you, actually.
Okay, how's that?
There we go. That's what I'm talking about there. Don't want to lose that. Yeah, listen, that's just some crazy stuff in the last 24 hours. First of all, let's just set the stage if anybody hasn't heard. Trump had been teasing this big announcement that was going to come on Monday since the end of last week, and a lot of people were speculating about what it may be. And then when it dropped, it was kind of a whimper instead of a shout. But now Trump's trying to put a good face on it and say, no, this is actually a good thing. First of all, just kind of want your assessment of what the hype was and what you think of what was announced.
Well, I think it turned into something of a nothing burger based on everything that Lindsey Graham had insisted was going to happen. I guess something must have happened between the time that Lindsey Graham was on the golf course with Trump and Trump's decision to do something. The more I see of President Trump, the more I realize that he has made the transformation from businessman and marketing genius to a purely political animal. I mean, sort of standing there and saying, I'm on the side of humanity is utterly ridiculous. Unless you're smoking crack and you're sitting in the corner in a dark room, you know that President Trump could have ended the war in Ukraine very, very quickly. All he had to do was say, look, this is not in the interest of the American people. We have no interest in what happens in eastern Ukraine. We want to promote peace, however. So I am now ending or suspending all further aid to Ukraine, withdrawing all U.S. military intelligence and other personnel from Ukraine. In which case, it would have been made perfectly clear to everybody that we were through with this and we were not going to continue it any longer. That would have then created an atmosphere conducive to some sort of arrangement arrived at by the Russians and the Ukrainians. But he did the opposite. He doubled down on what Biden was doing, frankly. And he refused to admit that this is a terrible mistake in which we should have never engaged. So now I think he fully owns it, Dan. It's his war. And here's the bottom line for Donald Trump. He's losing. He doesn't want to lose. He says he dislikes losing. Well, I would say he's lost this one. And the best that he can do is sort of walk out of the room and hope that nobody notices he was ever there and change the subject, because that's where we're headed.
You said he's doubling down on the Biden policies. I would argue that he's fractioning down on the Biden policies, because before Biden left in May of 2024, they passed a $61 billion package for Ukraine, which didn't even slow down the Russian advance at that time. Actually, the amount of territory Ukraine lost and the troops they lost accelerated after that was actually passed. It was probably due to many reasons. But now Trump, according to Axios yesterday, has loosened the bonds a little bit, has a half of $1 billion for the 2026 fiscal year budget and about $10 billion of other help. So that's like 1/6 of what Biden did. And if that produced nothing, what can anybody expect from what's going to happen on the terms of the weapons right now?
Well, militarily, as you and I have discussed for a very long time, this war ended some time ago. There is no chance for any sort of Ukrainian victory. In fact, it'll be a miracle if the Ukrainian state survives. But I think we have to keep something else in mind. When I said double down, the Financial Times reported within the last 24 hours that President Trump spoke on the phone to Zelensky and apparently asked Zelensky if he had the capability to hit Moscow and St. Petersburg and some other locations. And Zelensky apparently said, no, not really. And he said, well, you've got to do that. We've got to get you stuff and help you do that. This is Trump talking out of both sides of his mouth. If he says he's not really on any side, but on humanity's side, what in the hell is he telling Zelensky that he needs to attack deep into Russia and disrupt Russia or destroy Russia's capabilities? The whole thing stinks to high heaven. And I think, let's be frank, I think the Russians have walked away from Donald Trump. They don't see any evidence for any honesty or integrity in the conduct of our foreign policy. That's also been true in connection with Iran. We pretended that we were negotiating, and then we assisted the Israelis in launching a surprise attack. And then, of course, we weighed in ourselves. So I don't think anybody believes this any longer. And I think it's Trump's fault. He's just not being honest at all about anything.
Well, and what he says in that clip we just played there, that I've gotten a lot of wars solved over the last 6 months. I just hadn't got this one yet. I'm not sure what he's talking about. What wars do you think he may have in mind that he's ended?
Well, he likes to take credit for halting the war between Pakistan and India. I don't see any evidence that he had anything to do with it. But that's part of his game. I don't know what else he claims to have halted or stopped. I think he's arguing that the war with Iran is over. I
think that is one of them.
Good luck with that. As far as the Iranians are concerned and everybody else, we're co-belligerent with the Israelis. There is no peace settlement. There is no agreement. There doesn't appear to be any willingness to negotiate an agreement. And even though I think behind the scenes we've said to the Iranians that we would go back and revisit the nuclear issue, they've effectively said no thanks. For the same reason, the Russians, I think, are just pressing on to do what they're going to do because nobody believes us anymore. And, I'm glad you brought up this sort of demonstration of an unbridled arrogance on the part of Donald Trump. Well, I've solved all these wars and I deserve the Nobel Peace Prize kind of nonsense. Let's stop for a minute and consider this. This is 80 years ago in 1945 at the Victory Parade in Berlin. Harry Truman flew over for it. And of course, Eisenhower stood next to him and they watched, the masses of American troops and materiel and tanks and artillery and everything else march by. After it was over, Truman took Eisenhower's side, was very happy, very proud, as you would expect Truman to be. Remember, Truman was a fairly simple man. This is not some sort of a product of the Ivy League or anything. He was a child of the School of Hard Knocks. And he looked at Eisenhower and he said, General Eisenhower, this is magnificent. And we all owe you a lot for what you've done. He said, I want to award you the Medal of Honor. And Eisenhower, reeled back in shock. And he said, Mr. President, you can't do that. And President Truman said, well, of course I can. I'm President of the United States. He said, sir, you don't understand. I have never been in combat. I have never, ever concealed that truth. Everyone knows that I have never been in combat. And, it would be a disservice to all of those men who've died in action and won this decoration to give it to me. Please, Mr. President, don't mention that again. That's simply not appropriate. Can you imagine Donald Trump say, in addition to the Medal of Honor, I also deserve the DSC, the Distinguished Service Cross. And by the way, let me send you a list of all the other decorations. I mean, I'm just sort of sick to death of all of this self-aggrandizement. It's unbecoming. It's offensive. It's sickening.
Yeah.
When we were on active duty in the Army, more than once we've joked, I'm sure, about all of these generals in Latin America who were bedecked with medals from top to bottom, who'd never done anything, never seen any action. This sort of thing was bothersome. This is out of control, and it doesn't help us. It hurts us as a nation. We could use a serious dose of humility right now. And I don't see any of that manifesting itself anytime soon with our president.
Yeah, I think that's going to be imposed from the outside because it's going to continue on because it seems to have traction on the inside, at least among his followers.
Hey, Dan, can I interrupt for a second? The very subject that the Colonel was talking about regarding Moscow being bombed, and Trump did weigh in on it in this Q&A that he just had. It's very quick. It just I just wanted to alert you to it right here, right now.
Yeah, roll it.
Should Zelensky target Moscow, sir? Should Zelensky target Moscow or deeper into Russia?
No, he shouldn't target Moscow.
Is that why you?
Well, I mean, at least that's good that that's the case. Of course, you never know whether he says something in public is different than what he says in private. I hope that is the truth and not the other report. But I guess that's one thing.
Yeah, but you just hit the nail on the head again. He contradicts himself repeatedly on a number of different issues. I want this. I don't want this. You know, I'm disappointed in President Putin, and President Putin and I had a great conversation. I mean, what is it, Mr. President? I'm not sure he remembers all of the various things that he says on the spur of the moment.
Well, that's even more troublesome, but not shocking is the possibility, because I recall on that July 3rd phone call when Trump got off the phone, all the readout from the White House was all positive. And yeah, we had a good conversation, you know, and I told him I want these things. No comment about anything negative about Putin. And Putin's readout unequivocally said that he told him, yeah, he did. That's part of the readout on the Russian side. There's our president also said that Russia will achieve its goals, that the elimination of the root causes that led to these, and we will not retreat from these goals. That's what was said on the phone, and yet Trump seemed to think it was a good until later on when Putin actually acted on what he said and continued to move forward. Now, I want to ask, related to what you just said, about what we can make from this 50-day claim from Trump, because he says he's going to give Russia 50 days to come up with a ceasefire, or not a ceasefire. Well, yeah, I guess it's a ceasefire, some kind of a deal, or he's going to put on all these sanctions. We'll talk about the sanctions in a second. But this is also the same guy that said he's going to have this done before he gets into office, 24 hours after he gets into office, 100 days, then about 30 days. Then there was a 2-week period in there. All of those have come and gone. There was other time it was just a matter of days. That obviously didn't happen. And now here we have 50 days. What do you make of all these time frames that Trump keeps giving and then ignoring?
I think he's trying to postpone the inevitable. He did not want to go public after he gave more thought to the discussion with Senator Graham. I think he sat there and he said, you know, Lindsey, you make a lot of good points, and I think you're probably right. I probably ought to do this. Then he left, and who knows who he talked to, because my experience, limited though it is with him, is that he's very influenced by the last person with whom he talks. All right. So somewhere along the line, he talked to some other people and he backed off, and he said, well, maybe that's not such a good idea. You know, maybe I shouldn't push this confrontation with the Russians. Indeed, he should not. It's very dangerous right now, given the attitude in Russia towards us and towards what we've been doing, not only in Ukraine and Eastern Europe, but also in the Middle East. So I think he backed off. And then he said, well, what do I do then? Well, let me think about that. Well, I'll give a new deadline, you know, new deadline, 50 days. Who knows? Maybe this will work itself out over the next 50 days. I mean, I'm serious. I think that's kind of the way he thinks. And the truth is that in 50 days, if the Russians want to do it, they could be on the Polish border. There's nothing else out there now. There really isn't. The bridges are intact. There's nothing to stop the Russian military from crossing at several points along the upper river. I think there's enormous pressure right now on President Putin to do just that, to march right into Kiev and put an end to this heinous regime and this criminal gang that has been pushing this war and killing at least 1.5 to 1.8 million of its own soldiers in pointless fights that they can't win. We don't even know what the losses are in the civilian population. But I think it's, I'll give them 50 days and we'll see where we are. It essentially is what many politicians do. They kick the can down the road. So we'll kick this down the road. And there's the other point too, is don't underestimate his assumption that maybe in 30, 40, 50 days, no one will remember what he said anyway. Only now, I mean, you just look at the Epstein business. Now we're running film of Bongino and Kash Patel And President Trump sold his son, Don Jr., who I think is a very solid guy, actually. And unfortunately, what they're all doing is they're showing them talk about Epstein. Oh, we got to get Epstein. Epstein, everything has to be released. And all of a sudden now, what are we getting? Oh, well, we can't release everything. Ostensibly because too many people on their side, as well as the opposite, are all in the files. I think these things are beginning to catch up. So I think he's taking a risk by saying, well, if in 50 days, then if this isn't resolved, we'll do other things. And then hoping that maybe it'll resolve itself or be forgotten, because that's not happening anymore. He's being held accountable now.
There's no shortage of video footage of all those things you're talking about here. And one video footage that's very poignant here right now. You've mentioned Lindsey Graham a couple of times. He went on Face the Nation on Sunday, which we've talked about already, where he was emphatic about saying that there's going to be a sledgehammer, sanctions come down, that there's going to be seizing Russian assets, and that we're going to bring massive new aid. And then when it came across, and when Trump talked about, there was no talk about any kind of seizing Russian anything. There's the 50 days of secondary sanctions, which probably will never go into effect anyway. They wouldn't work. And then this trickle of new information, so completely different from what Lindsey Graham said on Sunday. Well, on Monday, Sean Hannity gave him a very friendly mic and asked him about the contradiction.
President Trump has restored America. He bombed those facilities in Iran. He gave them 60 days, and Iran played games with Trump, and he bombed them on 61. He has been trying to get Putin to the table. He believes Putin is playing him, and he changed the game today. What did President Trump do today? He's selling weapons to NATO to benefit Ukraine. It is good for the American economy. These factories that exist in America that make weapons, they will be selling those weapons to NATO. Europe will be paying for it, and Ukraine would benefit. But he also told Putin, I'll give you 50 days to end this war. And if you haven't come to the peace table to end the war by 50 days, in 50 days, I'm going to put a 100% tariff on all the countries that buy your oil and gas and defund your war machine.
Yeah, we'll see if that turns out here. But what do you make about that? I want to zero in on one part first, where he's talking about, it's going to make us a lot of money. I mean, he says it out loud, doesn't even hide behind it. We're going to sell, and it turned out to be somewhere around $10 billion worth of ammunition to NATO to pay us to give to Ukraine. But then the question has to be, wait, there's been a lot of news that our arsenals and our stockpiles of these key ammunition systems are not sufficient for our own potential future needs. So what do you make of that we seem to be going now below what was the minimum standard, and what impact is this going to have on anything?
I'm told by reliable sources that are familiar with the numbers of missiles on hand for use by the Navy and the Air Force in particular, that we have about 8 days worth of missiles, whether it's air-to-air missiles, or it's ground-to-air missiles, or it's strike missiles, whatever it happens to be. The SM series of missiles, Patriots, theater high-altitude air defense missiles. 8 days and we're out. And it was said to me, look, we can fight a conventional war for 8 days, and then we have to go nuclear. Well, stop and consider that. We have to go nuclear because we have no other means. I don't know if President Trump has been thoroughly briefed on that. I don't think Lindsey Graham cares, frankly. But President Trump needs to be aware of just how low the arsenal is right now in terms of numbers, because that's not the case, as we know, on the other side. And right now, Iran in particular is growing stronger and more robust and more capable with each passing day. I would argue the same is true for Russia and China. So, it's hard to connect the rhetoric with reality. We could talk ourselves into a position from which it will be difficult to retreat. That's what happened with Lyndon Johnson in Vietnam, and I think it could happen with President Trump. So making these policy pronouncements unconnected to reality is dangerous, because at some point, somebody somewhere is going to call your bluff. We've been very lucky thus far that hasn't happened. And people misread that. They assume, well, because the Russians haven't said no thanks, and by the way, if you do this to us, we'll do the following to you. That hasn't happened. And they think it hasn't happened because they believe that we are invincible, invulnerable, and unassailable, and that Russia is weak, poorly led, on the verge of collapse, and all this nonsense. I mean, these perceptions, regardless of what's happened during the war in eastern Ukraine, have never changed. Perhaps it was you that brought it up earlier when we were talking. Somebody said, well, look, they've had all this time. They dominate the battlefield. They've only advanced and taken another 1% of Ukraine. Well, first of all, gaining ground has always been much less important to the Russians than destroying the Ukrainian forces. And this is a problem we have in the mentality of the United States Armed Forces. You and I have seen this in action. We've got to go out there and gain ground and then cleanse the ground behind us of all potential enemy, when the real focus should always be the destruction of the enemy. Once the enemy's forces are gone, there's not a great deal that can be done to stop you from doing anything. That's where the Russians are right now. They've destroyed, for all intents and purposes, the Ukrainian armed forces. And now we're going to ship more things over there. Who's going to use them? Who's going to be trained to use them? Well, that's a question nobody answers. And remember that 40 to 50% of everything we send over there ends up on the black market. If they can do it, they'll do it. I mean, we've got people running around with Javelin missile systems in Mexico in the cartels. So God knows where half of this equipment ends up.
Yeah, we don't want to find out the hard way. You mentioned there about this 1%. That was actually Ambassador Whitaker, who said that Russia hadn't made any progress, so really we don't need to worry about it. Here's how he put it.
In the last 18 months, Russia has gained about 1% of Ukrainian land. I mean, they're making no success. They're losing thousands of soldiers every single day. And way too many, private citizens in Ukraine and the big cities are being injured. So I think this is a great next step in finally ending this war. But again, if Vladimir Putin wants to continue to fight on the battlefields of Ukraine, the United States of America will sell Europe armaments so that they can be used by Ukraine to defend themselves.
Do you think they actually believe that these weapons can help Ukraine defend themselves when it hasn't worked in 3.5 years? Or is it just, hey, this is what the boss said, so that's what we're going to parrot?
Well, I met Whitaker in the green room at Fox when I was in and out of that place, and he's a very nice guy. And he may be informed enough or credible enough to make decisions or sweeping pronouncements about legal matters. At the time, I think he was the acting attorney general or something. But he knows nothing about military affairs, and he's simply reading from the script. I think there was a statement, Russians are losing thousands of people a day when he's out of his mind. That hasn't happened for at least 2-3 years, if ever. I mean, they've never taken those heavy losses on every day in this war. It's the Ukrainians that have done that. I don't think he has any idea what ground truth is. And I don't think he's really interested, because he was appointed to that position to say whatever President Trump and the administration want him to say. So I wouldn't attach any significance to anything the man says.
The problem is with it is, though, there's, and we'll see how much of a problem it actually turns out to be. But of course, people who watch Legacy News, they hear him, the UN ambassador, and he's got that imposing figure, and he's got a good projection of voice. They hear that and they go, okay, well, it must be true. That, along with the other highly qualified 4-star General Jack Keane.
This is a major turning point, Maria, in the relationship between the United States and Russia, and also the United States' relationship to the war itself. I mean, frankly, President Trump has tried for a very long time, several months, to get a diplomatic deal with Putin just to simply go to a 30-day ceasefire, and could not get that. And he recognizes that that's likely not going to happen unless he takes some pretty tough action. And that tough action begins with the weapons and the ammunition. And clearly the thing that he wants to do get these weapons in the hands of the Ukrainian military to protect themselves, to help successfully defend against Russia's offensive operation, which they've been doing remarkably well at, but they need to be strengthened. And secondly, and in particularly, protect the citizens of Ukraine who are being every single night attacked through the air.
I mean, Doug, come on. We're just simply asking for a 30-day unconditional ceasefire of the guys that are in charge. He's literally talking here like Trump is daddy, talking to some, little teenagers who aren't acting right. He's giving him all this time and he won't make a deal. What do you make of it?
Well, it's more hubris and self-delusion. But this is not new. If we go back to 2022, and this is in the summer of 2022 or early spring, I remember speaking to someone who was in Mar-a-Lago, and this issue came up, and how are things going? And they said, this is really great. And I said, why is it great? Said, oh, well, the Ukrainians are winning. I said, the Ukrainians are not winning. Oh, yes, they are. They're winning, and they're going to win this war. We just need to support them, and this will be over in a few months. And I said, there is a snowball's chance in hell that the Ukrainians are going to defeat the Russian military establishment. The Russians aren't even organized and mobilized to fight yet, and they're doing quite well. Well, we know that was all nonsense, and so we're listening to more nonsense. This is another one of those turning points that's going to turn out to be extremely disappointing. Back to our earlier conversation. What happens in 50 days? I don't know. President Putin is in Kiev, and maybe somebody from the president's entourage will fly in to talk to him in Kiev. Or perhaps he's on the Polish border. There's this beautiful city called Lvov. In German, it was called Lemberg. It was under Austrian rule for about 130 years. It's a magnificent city. Perhaps they should have a meeting there in 50 days because the Russians could be there. This is all disconnected from reality.
And unfortunately, we have to remain disconnected from reality because now we're going to shift over to Europe, where we have NATO Secretary General Mark Rutte talking about how Trump's thing, if Keen there was talking, it's a turning point. Mark Rutte is saying this is a really big deal.
What's your takeaway from your meeting today and that announcement and how significant it is?
This is really significant. So last Thursday, I got a call from President Trump. He said, hey, Mark, we really want to ramp up the support for Ukraine when it comes to weapons. And then this morning, I was in the White House preparing for the meeting with him. And he said, when it comes to the sanctions, clearly we have to take the next step now. And he can only dialogue once, so he has to take this step by step. I totally understand that. But he was really, I think, irritated with the last phone call with Putin, who is not serious, it seems, about getting into peace deals, to peace negotiations.
So let me ask you, Doug, because Mark Rutte is the one that actually came up with this daddy thing for Trump that, he's just looking at, trying to bring everybody in order and just sucking up to Trump big time. Lots of the European leaders are. Is his commentary here bragging on what Trump did yesterday? Is that just Europe trying to say, hey, we just need to keep you engaged here, and then we'll promise after you're out of office that we'll get up to 5% GDP for our defense spending like you asked, but really we just want to buy time to get you out and keep the war going on. That's kind of what it seems to me, but what's your view?
Well, the globalist elites that run everything, the Sorosistas, as we call them, the Soros-backed political figures like Macron and others, they're the ones that open their borders to millions of people from Africa, the Middle East, and elsewhere to come and flood European countries. Right now, the Europeans are very upset over that. They're not pleased at all with millions and millions of foreigners that absolutely cannot assimilate. If anything, they've shown up to assimilate the Europeans and erase Western civilization and Europe from the map. These people are on borrowed time. Rutte and his friends in London, Paris, and Berlin, Merz and the rest of them, they're about as popular as the plague right now. They're going to be removed from power. One of their ploys to stay in power is to drag us in. If they can drag us in and keep this war going, they can make the argument. And unfortunately, Europeans are even more gullible and easily misled than Americans. And they'll say, oh, yeah, Russia's bad. The Americans are here. They're helping us, and we're going to defeat Russia. That's essential to maintaining their positions in government. It's not going to work. It's absolutely hopeless. But that is what they're all about. We have to come to terms with that reality. So, I think that the number 17 was mentioned during the discussion between President Trump and Rutte, 17 Patriot missiles. How many targets will that take care of? 8 or 9, if they're lucky, 7 or more likely 7 or 8. Every time an incoming missile is targeted to land in your area, you're going to fire 2 missiles at that missile. Now, how many hundreds of missiles need to be fired to put the Patriots out of business? Not very many. How many Patriots do we produce in a year? 660. How many have we got on hand? I don't know, but I can tell you that you'll go through 100 or 200 or 300 Patriot missiles in a couple of days. This is all crazy nonsense. It's not going to change anything, but it keeps the war going, so to say, maintains the fiction that something is happening and NATO is robust and capable. You'll remember years ago, we used to look at the Dutch army, and the Dutch army was not the most robust military establishment in the history of the world. There were times when the Dutch were very good soldiers, but I remember people laughing because in order to stuff their lengthy hair into their helmets, they had to wear hairnets. And I didn't exactly see much discipline in the Dutch units. They were fairly unimpressive. I don't think Rutte is going to mobilize anybody to do anything. I don't see anybody in Europe lining up to be drafted to fight the great war against Russia along the Dnieper River in central Ukraine. I think it's all nonsense.
Okay, so then what is to make of what he said? I think it was about a week ago when he was just almost like fist pounding on the lectern when he said, hey, we got to get ready for a 2-front war here. We've got China over in the Indo-Pacific, and they're just waiting, chomping at the bit to get Russia to win over here. And so we've got to be ready to fight in both directions. It's coming, folks, in 3 to 5 to 7 years. That's like today, tomorrow, and next month. We have to emergency. We got to move forward. What do you make of all that?
Well, I increasingly term this a sort of Anglo-American Israeli narrative, because MI6, the CIA, and the Mossad are all joined at the hip. They all sit around and they concoct these narratives for consumption in the West. Russia's evil, it's on the march. Iran is evil, it has to be destroyed. If we don't destroy Iran, the world as we know it will end. China is behind everything. China is responsible for everything that we don't like. And this narrative works. It's working. It continues to work, unfortunately. But it's not going to last too much longer because everyone's falling apart financially and economically. We've gone through this process of deindustrialization. When you look at us, it was Lindsey Graham saying, oh, this is great for the economy. We're selling more weapons and munitions to the Europeans that are going to then turn around and donate it, I guess, to the Ukrainians. And this is good for the economy. This is good for jobs. Well, what do we produce? We produce energy. We have an agricultural sector, which I think is underappreciated. But more important, what do we build other than that? Are we building high-end microcircuitry? Are we competitive with Taiwan, Japan, and Korea? No. What are we building then? We're building military equipment. We're building munitions and rockets and so forth. They're not necessarily the best, by the way, based upon what we've seen happen in eastern Ukraine and more recently with Iran. But that's not an economy. You can't sustain yourself as a great power that way. You have to have a manufacturing base. If you have no productivity and from a manufacturing standpoint, you can't be a superpower. It's that simple. So this is all a last gasp attempt on the part of the United States and its allies in Europe to be relevant strategically. It's not going to work. It's not going to last.
And so, look into this so-called security dilemma, where one side makes some moves and some angry rhetoric, whatever. And then the other side says, "All right, well, I got to match that," and then they go up a little bit more, et cetera. What do you believe is going to be the reaction to these kinds of statements? And it's not just Rutte, but it's many. The Germans are really emphatic about this as well, and so are the British and the French and several others. that when you are Russia or China, the key two on this, when they hear these things, are they just going to say, it's just rhetoric, we don't worry about it? Or will they say, no, we have to take action as though it's going to be real and we have to keep ramping up?
I think the problem in Europe is very similar to the problem here at home. And that is that until war and destruction visits the average American, the average Frenchman, the average Englishman, the average German, the attitude is going to be, well, that's their problem in Berlin, or if they want to do that, there's nothing I can do about it. I don't have any influence. I have to live my own life. I've got to put bread on the table. I've got to go to work. I can't fix that. You understand? That's where I think we in the West are at this point. People are frustrated. Look at all the people who went out and voted for President Trump. Show me what he's doing. He's reneged on virtually everything. We're talking about foreign and defense policy. We haven't even talked about illegal immigration, the utter and complete failure of any attempt to effectively deport people. Tom Homan is talking to people and says, I have no money, I have no resources, I'm the border czar. Well, no kidding. There's no strategy. There's no strategy for anything. Everything is seat of the pants. And that's Donald Trump. It's what he thinks at a given point in time. And the people on the Hill are not focused on anything other than keeping the system running.
Yeah.
Keep the locomotive running. We got to stay on track. Keep the money flowing. Everyone will be fine. Well, at some point, we know the locomotive's not going to run anymore. We're getting closer to that with each passing day. Whether you talk to Nassim Taleb or Peter Schiff or James Rickards or any number of different people, Besant is doing everything he can to repair the financial disaster that we have on our hands. And I don't think it's going to work. But it doesn't matter. At this point, nothing matters until it happens. So when you get the financial crisis here and things crumble, and suddenly you look out on the street and you say, where are the police? Where are the services? Who's providing this or that? Then you have a crisis that you have to focus on at home. That hasn't happened yet. But I think we're getting closer with each passing day. Nobody talks right now about the criminality that spills into our country thanks to the illegal human trafficking and the illegal border crossers. Nobody talks about Los Angeles, where we saw all of these foreign flags, Mexican, El Salvadoran, 1.2 million estimated illegals in Los Angeles, locking arms with others who are from Latin America and Los Angeles and saying, they're not leaving, we're staying. Well, that's open rebellion. That's open hostility to the American people and the United States government. Who's bringing it up? Oh, no. We have to worry about those Iranians. Let's destroy Iran. Oh, we got to stop the Russians. And those Chinese. Yeah, the Chinese. See all their armies massing on everybody's borders? Of course not. Chinese aren't going to invade anybody. The biggest problem the Chinese have is holding China together. 1.4 billion people. Nobody.
Well, yeah, and actually that was a question I wanted to have. So while Roots is talking about Russia's coming after us and China's coming after us and they're working together, from a realistic perspective, do they have any point? Is there really a chance that Russia and China would attack the West writ large?
No, not unless we attack them. Now, that we put enormous pressure on them. I mean, this entire tariff escapade is effectively another act of war. Trump says, well, I'm going to go to 100% tariffs on everybody and anybody who buys Russian oil or, this is just lunacy. This is why BRICS has arisen, which now it consists of 20 countries. There are 40 more that want to join. I predict before they're through, there'll be 80, 85. They'll represent more than half of the world's gross domestic product. I think they'll represent more than half the world's population. They may be there now. We don't seem to get it. That what we're doing is we're creating the very thing that we say we're trying to deter. If you threaten, if you bully repeatedly, and you attack people financially, economically, they're going to respond. And that's the de-dollarization that's underway. That's why Nassim Taleb says over and over and over again, gold is now the reserve currency because our dollar is no longer regarded as a store of value. So I
You know,
can
that
tell
was
everybody, watch the bond market. That's the bellwether. When that goes under, then we're in trouble. And that'll
that
probably happen at 5% for the 10-year bond.
that was one of the things that really stood out to me about Graham's comments on Sunday, which presumably meant he had talked about it to Trump, because what he said, well, I don't want to get ahead of the president, but what we've talked about is that we would tariff or put these secondary sanctions on China, India, and Brazil, of course, the foundation of BRICS itself. And he said, we'll put them in a position to where they have to choose. Are you going to do business with us, or are you going to do business with somebody else? Because you can't do both. And I was cringing as he said that, because I thought, I don't put people in a position to have to choose, because they might not choose the way you want. How do you see that expanding the concern you have?
Well, this is the Trump mantra. I don't think he understands the implications. It's our way or the highway. If that's what you tell everyone, the world has changed. This is not 1991. This is 2025. The world doesn't have to take our highway. You know, there's two things we need to understand. On the one hand, Trump and Biden are on the same highway. The only thing we did when we elected Trump was we changed lanes. We're still on the same highway. That's the first thing. The second thing is that if you ultimately threaten people long enough, they'll abandon you. And that's happening. We now have SIPRs, which is the alternative to the SWIFT system. We're watching countries do business with each other in their own currencies, whether it's Japan and China, or Saudi Arabia and China, or Iran and China. It doesn't matter. They're doing business in their own currencies. In other words, people are getting away from the dollar. We are being isolated. We are being treated as patient zero, the original carrier of the plague. Put us in a room. And then you have President Trump, who decides, I'm going to bomb these sites in Iran, and joins the war as a co-belligerent. You have our allies in Tokyo and Seoul watching this and saying, this man's lost his mind. There's no reason for this. What are we doing this for? You know, and this unconditional obedience to whatever comes out of Israel. All of this is doing enormous damage to the American people in the United States. And I think it's hurting Europe, because we're dragging them down with us. At some point, this is going to change, because I predict the governments in Europe will change. But remember that America is also the microwave nation. You know this, Dan. Well, when's this going to happen? Well, next week. And I will look at people and I say, well, it's developing. These things are coming together, but it's not going to happen overnight. BRICS did not happen overnight. It began over time, but we've accelerated the process. They've now built institutions much more rapidly than we thought possible. The point is that Americans say, if you do something on day one, then on day two, it should happen. It's not that way. The world does not operate like a microwave, but we're headed in very dangerous and bad directions unnecessarily. Because remember something else, we're harming people and nations who are our creditors. Think about that. Why would you take action against Japan in particular, who's our largest creditor outside of the United States? What is the purpose of that? What if these people decide, and I think they're getting close to it, to simply offload our treasuries in a giant fire sale? Well, they're not going to be the Lone Rangers when that happens. The countries just say, we've had it. We're not dealing with these people anymore. We depend on foreign investment. That's how our system works. People show up, they buy our bonds, we take the money. The money helps us sustain ourselves, our economy. And this is a cycle that has been going on for decades. When the foreign investment stops, what do? Well, we've been buying our own bonds. That's called toxic debt that sits on your desk at the Fed, but it has no value. You're buying up your own stuff to conceal the disaster that's underway. That's why you've got to look at all of these factors. But anyone who's a competent economist, and there are lots of them that people can go listen to, they're warning us that this is not going to end well. And it will come to a climax at some point. That's why we thought when we voted for President Trump, he would say, number one, I have to shed these overseas commitments, got to end these conflicts. I got to bring most of the forces home because I have to cut spending. I have to show our creditors that we're serious about reducing spending. I mean, that's effectively what he said. And what have we got now? We've got more of the same. So people are now saying, well, write us off, write them off. These people are crazy. They've lost their minds. They're going to go over the cliff. We are going to go over the cliff.
It's yes, I thought the way you put that a while ago was really eye-opening and so accurate. With the current administration, we didn't change routes; we just changed lanes on the same route, and I think we're seeing that manifest out. That's the whole Biden-like thing with the Ukraine war. That's just another manifestation of it. But let me ask you something. I know that over the years you said several times that we don't need to be worried about China as an aggressive power that's going to invade us because they just want to do business. And do you see anything changing? And or actually, a better way to put that, if you were put in charge right now and if Trump magically would just listen to you and then do what you suggested, what would you do instead of sending NATO out to get ready to fight China and Russia? What would be a better course of action?
Well, remember, we are confronting Russia on Russia's doorstep. And from the very beginning, I and a few other people said that's strategically stupid. You know, why would the Russians and the Chinese pour into Mexico, raise Mexican forces and armies, put missile installations, and threaten us from Mexico? Because we could destroy them in Mexico. Mexico's on our doorstep. Our logistical problems are minimal. So when you talk about fighting China or fighting Russia, we're talking about going thousands of miles away from the United States. Heavy dependence on long lines of communication and logistics, you know, moving forces, moving supplies, munitions, and everything else. It's unrealistic nonsense. We can't win a war over Taiwan. First of all, we don't need to. And we should get out of that business entirely. That's back to the idea of, the Chinese are going to defend us or defend Cuba against us. Why? Why would they bother? It's a lot of nonsense. So the bottom line is we got to get out of all of these things. We have to focus on our country because everything that's really critical to our future will be decided here, not over there. And Americans, I think, instinctively understand that, but Washington doesn't. Washington thinks everything here is fine because most of the people in Washington live in a bubble. They don't live in the real world. They're not pressed hard. And unfortunately, the elites, the people who are billionaires or worth hundreds of millions of dollars, they're not being pressed by economic matters and financial concerns here in the United States, let alone criminality and illegal aliens. It's not a problem for them. It is a problem for the overwhelming majority of Americans who care about their country and are trying to make a life for themselves and their children. But the bottom line is that China, you want to deal with China. China right now, Chinese ownership of agricultural land in the United States. You know how much agricultural land the Chinese actually own? Less than 1% of our agricultural land. Now, if you don't like that, you know what you do? You pass a bill. And the bill says no foreign entity can own agricultural property in the United States. They can't own minerals. They can't own mines. Just pass the bill. And then they have to divest themselves. It's very simple. Secondly, if you don't like the fact, a lot of people don't, and I agree with them, that we have massive numbers of Chinese in our laboratories, at universities, well, then you need to have an executive order that says all the Chinese are going to leave and send them home. And at the same time, get control of your borders. Get control of the harbors, of the airports. We have no control over any of that. People pour in and out all the time. Now, somebody will say, well, we don't want to throw all the Chinese out. Well, that's fine. Then we can be discriminating. But my point is there are ways to deal with this. The Vietnamese a few years ago threw all the Chinese out of Vietnam. Are the Chinese and the Vietnamese doing business? Yes.
That's a good point.
The Chinese have thrown Japanese out of China. Are the Chinese and the Japanese doing business? Yes. Listen, this is the real world. You make decisions on the basis of your national interest. That's what you do. But the Japanese are not going to attack China. Chinese don't want to attack Japan. The Chinese certainly don't want to go back to Vietnam. They did that in 1979. That was a very unsatisfactory experience. Listen, we have to come back to reality and stop looking at everything as a potential club with which to hit people over the head. And that's the way we look at the financial system, which we built after the war, which is crumbling, frankly. It's falling apart now. We don't want to live. We say we understand this. President Trump says he understands it and is prepared for it. But in reality, we don't want to live in a world where we don't have hegemony over everything. You know, if we did, we'd change overnight, dramatically scale back our investment in the defense budget and bring our forces home. You know, but we don't really believe that. It's the same problem that Israel has right now. Israel refuses to live in a region that it does not dominate. So what's that mean? That means that everybody has to be subjugated to Israel. How does Israel do that? With us. That's our job, to subjugate everybody to Israel. That's ridiculous. And that's not a good future for Israel. If Israel wants to exist in that region, it has to come to a different arrangement. Just as if we want to exist in the world, we have to come to terms with a different arrangement. We cannot always dominate.
And you know what you mentioned a minute ago about a lot in Europe, people-wise anyway, are starting to get uncomfortable with the way the elites are doing it with the France, Germany, UK, etc. They have been dominating stuff. But then this is kind of maybe like a canary in the coal mine with Robert Fico talking about how he's getting damn tired of a lot of this because I don't know if it's passed since I haven't seen since we came on the air, but Europe was just about to pass its 18th round of sanctions against Russia. But Slovakia, among others, are saying, hey, this is bad for us. I don't want to get into this. Here's how he put it.
We will never vote for this madness of the Commission. The phone calls of the hardliners are coming to an end. There is a written proposal of the Commission's guarantees on the table, which the Commission offers us for voting on the 18th sanction package. I have already said that this dispute cannot be won 100-0, but we cannot even lose it 100-0. Those who want to live with the wolves must live with them. This is unfortunately the cruel reality of the current union. Therefore, we must fight to the last moment for an acceptable compromise. Right now, I am sending a proposal of the Commission's guarantees to all relevant political parties, and I expect a statement from them. I believe that the answers of the presidents of the opposing parties will not harm Slovakia at all costs. It is necessary to realize that the suspension of the flow of Russian gas will take place after 1.1/2028, i.e. after the parliamentary elections, and it may be the current opposition, which will gain power and which will have to wipe the tears of the abandoned workers or run away from their anger.
That last phrase is what really got me, because or run away from their anger. He seems to be warning that if we keep going down this path here, which is the elites running everything at the pointing at confrontation with Russia, that at some point even the local populations may rise up. How do you see it?
Eventually, yes, but it's back to what we discussed earlier. They have to be touched by the destruction. In other words, their lives have to be severely harmed in a way that's unambiguous. Until that happens, most of the Europeans will sort of march like sheep in the direction their leaders tell them to go, provided it doesn't hurt them. As soon as there's some real pain, all of that will change. I don't think that's really surprising. It's in the nature of most modern societies that they behave that way. Let me finish with something that's very important for most Americans and people in the West to understand. In 1914, Russia's number one trading partner in the world was Germany. And Germany's number one trading partner in the world was Russia. In 1941, Germany's number one trading partner was the Soviet Union. And the Soviet Union's number one trading partner was Germany. Now, my point is this. It's self-defeating for the people that live in Europe to behave as they are behaving, because of what we are telling them to do. That's the real crux of the matter. And it goes back to the simple truth that we don't live in Europe. We're Americans. We live in the Western Hemisphere. We live in North America. And the Europeans have got to come to terms with that. They've never really understood that. De Gaulle was the exception. And he said that from the very beginning. And he pointed out that Britain was not really part of Europe. It was an island. And again, British interests on that island were never connected absolutely with what happened on the continent. And he knew that. So there has to be a re-examination of all the things that are going on. But right now, the elites that are in power will not do that. These are the Sorosistas, the products of the globalist movement. They are the ones responsible for the destruction that has already been wrought across Europe. They will, I suspect, be held accountable. I don't know what it'll look like. It could look like the Place de la Vendée, the French Revolution in 1789 before we're through. There will be so many people so angry about the misfortune visited on them. I think we're going to face something similar here at some point when people finally say that's enough, no more. And the disappointment here is particularly acute because so many people express such faith in President Trump's readiness to chart a fundamentally new course. That's all gone under.
Well, listen, I appreciate you bring, at least explaining what's going on, the fact that we changed lanes, not changed paths. And I appreciate more than anything else your path that it doesn't have to go down this way. There hasn't been this uprising yet. We haven't paid this price yet with the pain having been inflicted upon us. And there's still possibility, as late as it is in the hour, to shift course. And then you've laid out what is a good course, something that could be beneficial for everybody, lower the tensions anywhere else, raise the possibility of economic prosperity, and then set a course that can be sustained for a long time. That is like the recipe for something great. We just have to hope that we can get there, even if it's by stumbling and mistakes. But that's certainly a better course than where we're heading right now. And we really appreciate you highlighting that today.
Okay, Dan. Good to talk with you and Gary.
Thank you very much. And same with us as well. And we will look forward to seeing you on the next episode of Daniel Davis Deep Dive.